How do you back? Where do I go to find that out? Where do I go to read about Bukhari? Okay. When did Bukhari write? When did Bukhari write this down?
A Bible written again.
Is this another one of these Bibles?
Bible inside that, like the one inside that.
No. It's different than the one inside. It's a different one.
It definitely has
So
to
define the Bible and define it with some seeds. They stole it from the church, and they were trying to send it to the high school. The police, they actually caught those thieves, and they got the Bible. They analyzed it. It is near enough to the time of Jesus Christ. The story is closer to Barnabas' testimony. So I tell you,
is that another one that's close to Barnabas? Like the one in Sinai?
No, it's a Bible. It's a Bible. It's not.
You said close to Barnabas' testimony.
Closer to Barnabas. Yeah.
So if
In it said Jesus is the man and all what he done with the will of God. It says also that Jesus never been in the cross. There was a guy, his name is Judah. He's the one who wanted the Roman and told him about Jesus. And the Rome and God made that person look like Jesus, and he's the one who wanted.
And this is the Bible. This is the Bible.
It's in the Bible. It's in some.
Right. So Western.
And it's written here.
My friend.
no, I don't.
My friend, these things.
You don't know what it is as well.
No, of course not.
This
This is a lie. This is. You may believe me if you wish, but it's not true.
It's not true.
No.
My friend.
Even the Pope, we asked for a copy of that.
And did he get it? Did he get the copy?
Huh?
Did he get the copy?
I don't know. I wasn't there.
Well,
You know
I
why
hope
he
they give him
didn't?
one.
You know why he didn't?
I wasn't there.
Give him one.
You know why he didn't get the copy? Because there isn't one.
What?
There isn't one. They didn't give him the copy because there isn't one.
Yeah,
That's
so-
why.
It's
This is your allegation. Yeah?
You know something? These things, anything that's not well aired and well known in Western academic circles, is just not worth talking about. Honestly, because I tell you why. Because in Western academia, they really want to undermine Christianity. So if they could have something like that, and they thought it was really credible, they take it. And Bart Ehrman will talk about it, but he talks nothing about these things. So if he's not talking about it,
I've got the
it's
article
not
at
worth
home.
thinking about.
Are you going to be here again next week?
All right.
He
found
will
it.
be.
All right.
He found it.
I
found it.
I found it. And it's actually from the year 500.
It's in Spanish.
No,
we don't
It's just
get-
the Gospel
sorry,
of
sir.
Barnabas.
It's just
You can't
close
have-
at the time.
It's in Spanish,
It's the year
yeah.
500.
Yeah.
So it's no good.
Can I see that?
There was no, you can't have
No,
my
I just want to know if this is the right one I'm talking about.
Wait, what?
It's written.
There you go.
It's a written goal.
Spanish.
There it is. Yeah,
Can I see, man? So I see what you're saying makes sense.
Sir, you can't hold my phone. Whether you like or not, I'm not passing my phone to you. You have to accept
What
that.
did it say?
Okay.
Tell me what did it say. Hold it and tell me. Show me what.
Okay, it's a sacred 14 million Bible which Jesus predicts the coming of Prophet Muhammad unflattered in Turkey. Okay, the Bible is to be believed to be written in the year 105.
Are you saying it or reading it?
I'm giving you the date. Vatican wants the Bible is 1,500 years old. That means it was written in the year 500. So the Vatican does want it, and it was written 1,500 years ago. So how many years does it make it?
So you have any?
How many years does it make it? We have Bibles well before that, sir. Well before that. That to us is old.
No.
That to us is no good, sir. You've got this really wrong.
King James was, yeah.
No, forget it. We don't use. We're Catholic. We don't use
King
the
James
James.
1611. That's
Yeah.
No,
Sir, I've got it there. It is a 500-year-old Bible. This to us is no good.
I'm not sure that is the one I'm talking about.
It is the one you're talking about because it was being sold for 14 million, as you said.
King some.
Okay, sir. Yes. So, sir, again, unfortunately, you've got this wrong.
I go what?
You've got it incorrect.
What did it say about Jesus?
I just told you. I'm not going to get into it. I'm not going to get into what it says about Jesus. Unfortunately, you've got this wrong.
my friend. We will hopefully have your extremely interesting documents.
Yes,
Next week.
Are you going to come? Are you going to
My
come?
friend's going to be here. I may be, but he will be here, and he'll tell me about it. But you know, you will be a revelation for this park. These Muslims here are behind you. They're not telling us this stuff. We need them to tell us this stuff. Thankfully, you're here today to tell us about it at least. So I'm grateful. But you know what I want to say? In addition to the Catholic faith, the Christian religion, having a greater set of historical documents close to the time of Jesus compared to what Muslims have far from the time of Muhammad, Muslims have said to me, not their hadith, although they're 250 years after the events of Muhammad's life, they've got all these transmitters who are reliable, you know, in the isnads, the chain of transmission. Reliable men like Abu Huraira who passed these on. But actually, you know, I've got the Encyclopedia of Islam, and in it, I've got here where it says that these transmitters, their biographies are written centuries after those men lived.
No.
So that you can't rely on saying that Abu Huraira was reliable.
His wife,
all this.
man. It's not century. I'm talking about his wife.
It's true, yeah, but his wife.
His wife, she's one who narrated his hadith.
You say that, but the fact that it said that she narrated his hadith, that's only recorded 250 years after she died.
250 years after.
Because Bukhari, Al-Tirmidhi and
gathered by
Muslim,
different people, man. Most of the hadith gathered by different people.
Yes, but they're not written until 200 to 250 years after Muhammad and Aisha died.
No, 250 years.
Otherwise, Muslims would have these great collections earlier than Bukhari.
The reason, not Bukhari is a student of another person who's a student of another
yes,
person.
But only Bukhari
in earlier
wrote.
days as well.
Only Bukhari. We've only got Bukhari's collection though.
No, there is other collection. There are several, about 4 or 5 collections.
Yes, there are 6 major collections, but they're all no earlier than 200. They're no earlier than 200 to 250 years after Muhammad.
No, there is before that.
And they're not the great collections, and they are not in existence. The best you've got is the Muwatta. The best you've got is the Muwatta, which gives some legal precepts. About 150 years after Muhammad died, that's the best you've got, really. But the details of Muhammad and all the meat and bones of Islam is in the collections that men like Bukhari produced. The fact that you've got the Quran, for example, you say that you gave me the fact they memorized the Quran. That's not true. Here's how I know. Because in the Hadith in Bukhari, it says that the Quran was written down because Abu Bakr said, so a general or soldier came to Abu Bakr and saying, many of the people who memorized the Quran have died, so we need it written down. We need it written down. So clearly not everybody was memorizing it.
Brother, you're making this wrong, man. You're making it up, man. Because the one who gathered the Quran is Uthman ibn Affan.
Now therefore I'm teaching you something. Before Uthman, are you saying there was nothing before Uthman?
Before Uthman, there was people who were writing in a separate document. So
no, you're wrong.
He actually gathered all of them together.
You're very, very wrong here.
No, I'm not wrong.
In the time of Abu Bakr, men came and said, look, people are dying and we're losing the verses of the Quran, so we need to get it written down. It was written down, and eventually it was when after Abu Bakr died, it eventually found its way to Hafsa, and she kept it. And then in the time of Uthman, men came from the distant battlegrounds and said, look, people are fighting over the Quran.
And brought it from the Christian Bibles.
And then they said, they don't want to be like the Christians arguing. So now we want to get it written down. So what Uthman did, he said to Zayd ibn Thabit, who collected the Quran at the time of Abu Bakr, come and bring 4 other men of the Quraysh and now produce it again and collect Hafsa's Quran and give it to us so we can produce from the Quranic materials the Quran. So what we've got is Hafsa's Quran, which is just made and not used, it seems. Then we get Uthman's Quran, which is a remake, but not the same as Hafsa's Quran. And we've got the men, and Zayd ibn Thabit, when he collects the Quran originally, he's collecting it from date leaves, he's collecting it from bits of bone, he's collecting it from stones. Clearly this is not a complete collection. And men say, I've got quotes, that they didn't get the whole Quran written down. And we know the verse of stoning is not in there, because it was eaten by a sheep, right?
Eaten by a sheep.
Yeah, that's in the Hadith. That's in the Hadith. It's not like controversial. So there's the verse of stoning is not in the Quran for that reason. So you see, when you say to me, it's like we just collected both of them, that's not true. We've got to go back to Abu Bakr. and then we've got to look at the verses which are missing.
In the time of Abu Bakr, or the time of Prophet Muhammad, people used to memorize, and they went to gather all the Quran together.
Tell me, if they did, here's an example. If they did, why did Abu Bakr say to Zayd ibn Thabit, go and collect the Quran? He collects it from stones, from bones, and from date leaves. Now, why not? One moment. Why didn't Zayd ibn Thabit just go to one of the Sahaba and say, recite it for me?
He knew it already.
Yeah, why didn't Zayd ibn Thabit just go to one of the Sahaba? Why did Zayd, according to the Hadith, collect it from date leaves, stones, and bones? Why bother if it was memorized?
You want the answer?
Yes.
Yeah, the answer is he already knew it by heart. He knew. Zayd knew the Quran.
They memorize it by heart.
I'm listening to him.
Out of fear, to make a mistake, out of fear, he just wanted to double check with either someone that...
Where does it say that in the Hadith? You're making that up.
Come on.
You're making that up. It's not in the Hadith. Okay. That's not good enough.
Did you say okay?
All we have is that Zayd, when asked to collect, never said Zayd knew the Quran. He said, this is what he says. Here's how we know that's not true. Because Zayd said, don't ask me to do this. It's a hard task. And Abu Bakr had to persuade him to do it. And when the time of Uthman, the same problem. It was like, what on earth is going on? Uthman had to persuade Zayd to do it again. He said the Prophet never asked this to be done, and it's a very, very hard thing to do. So Zayd never said, oh, I know it in my head. He went and collected it as religiously as he could, and then when he collected it, then it was formed into the documents. And then Uthman didn't say, oh, we'll just get someone who memorized it. No, we had to go and collect the first Quran that Hafsa now had, and he said collect the Quranic materials so we can make a Quran in the Qurayshi dialect. And that will be sent everywhere. All the Sahaba, all the Quranic empire, so these did not know these in their heads. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been needed to go through all of this.
Then my question is, what in the Hadith says that Zayd did not know it? Because you claim that Zayd did. So I'm saying Zayd knew the Quran. You say this is not in the Hadith. Okay, what in the Hadith says that Zayd did not know it? Because you're claiming that.
All right. So now you want me to say the Hadith must say Zayd did not know it, when all I need to show is that Zayd didn't, when he was told by Abu Bakr to collect it, Zayd didn't say, oh, don't worry, I'll just write it down for you now because I was Muhammad's scribe when he was alive. No, Zayd didn't do that. He went looking for date palms, bits of bone, and rocks to get it when verses were written down. That is clearly a man who didn't have it in his head, and he couldn't go to, and he never went to other people to get them to recite.
Did not know the Quran out of a reasoning that you're doing. So now I'm
is it false reasoning?
Yes.
It's the most obvious reasoning. It's the most obvious reasoning. If I'm asked to do, why didn't Abu Bakr just write it down? Why did he ask Zayd to go and get collected the Quran? Abu Bakr knew it.
I didn't know.
You're saying one of the four rightly guided caliphs didn't memorize the Quran.
I don't know if he did.
So why are you assuming Zayd?
He did not. I'm saying I don't know.
You're saying Zayd had memorized it, but one of the four rightly guided caliphs didn't memorize it.
I don't know if they did.
Well, you know Zayd did.
Yeah.
On what evidence?
I don't get this. I'm a bit confused.
Khalid bin Walid did not memorize it.
So how do you know then? How do you know that if you don't know Abu Bakr, how do you know Zayd? Where's the hadith that Zayd memorized it?
I'm telling you, I don't know if they did. Maybe the four of them did. I don't know. Now, the point is, if I tell you go and collect all my clothes, how do you know you collected them all?
I go to your mother, your father, your brothers and your friends.
You need to know what are my clothes.
Rubbish, because whenever somebody goes to do a job for somebody else, they don't have to know everything. They just go to people they know and get the things then. Oh, John wants me to get his key, his front door key. Can you give me his front door key? Oh yes, I don't have to know your front door key.
Now, doesn't it make more sense to ask someone that already knows what's all that needs to be collected? So you're telling me that
and that's not all of it. For example, with your clothes, I go to people who know what belongs to you. They don't know your whole collection of clothes, but different people who know where your clothes are and what they can make sure I get them. So Zayd giving them to people who had the writings of the prophets.
What makes more sense? Go for someone that, okay, I will need to ask this and that person and see what they all give me, or go to someone that already knows what's the whole collection.
What you do, you said Zayd knew it, so you'd write it down yourself and then take everything you could, I suppose, from everybody else and note that down and compare and contrast. But he said in the hadith to go to the Sahaba to get them to recite it to him. Why not? Why is it specifically saying he went to bits of bone, bits of leaf, and other things to get the verses of the Quran, but never does it say he went to the men who allegedly memorised it. You guys never memorised this. It's all rubbish. It's lies. It's a story. Same as in Uthman's time as well. It's all nonsense.
No, it's not.
Wake
Millions
up,
of Muslims
man.
memorise.
Wake up. Your own traditions, which, by the way, even if I accepted them, show they weren't memorised because of the conduct that's described in the Quran. But even so, those writings are 200 years, 200 to 250 years after the events they described. They're worthless. Historically worthless. And Western scholarship has shown that. You're living in a fairyland, my friend.
No, he's not. No, he's not. I know.
The UK is yes, I like that.
There's
we have
kids
one
in
thing we can
Somalia.
agree on.
There's kids in
Very much so, and I'll say no more.
Do you understand the reasoning that they knew it? Because it's much easier to
I just can't. I think it's extremely unrealistic to describe it this way. You're trying to fill a big hole in the alleged history of the religion of Islam. Really, you are, and the Hadith show that hole because they're produced at a time before your approach, which is the modern Muslim one, just says, "Oh, it was all memorised." Before that was crystallised at a time when it was still not required to say that. So Abu Bakr, not knowing that there'd be a problem for Islam when these hadith were produced and translated in the 20th century, wrote down what he wrote innocently, but it's shown that actually early Islam's quite chaotic.
No, it's not. I think you're misunderstanding a lot of things. Number one,
And we
is
know,
that society.
but even so, we know that the Haran,
So you're not
the
listening.
Hadith are simply, this is the most damning indictment because it covers all the Hadith. They're simply not historically valid. You can't have a word of mouth over 2 centuries.
You as a Christian can't even
How are
say
you
that.
using them to prove anything? If you,
It's what I'm getting. The reason why is because Muslims say Bukhari is really top-notch historical stuff for knowing the history of Islam. Muslims aren't too keen on the Sirah because they put the Hadith first. And there was a big dispute amongst Muslims in the early centuries between the philosophers and the legalists and the Hadith scholars. And the Hadith scholars eventually won after great persecution. But the Hadith are being the centerpiece of Islam. Without the Hadith, you've got no Quran, no Islam. And the reason is, one wouldn't know where the Quran comes from, how it was compiled without the Hadith. You wouldn't know it's from heaven, from the angel Gabriel, without the Hadith. That's why it's so central.
100% Hadith
Okay.
is essential.
Yeah.
No
So
Hadith,
then,
no
that's
Islam.
why I think the Quran only Muslims are crazy. They're just mad. You heard of Quran only Muslims?
The Quraniun, yeah.
Yeah, they're just mad. They're mad.
non-Muslims.
Irrational.
Yeah.
But you see, given that the Hadith is central, I talk about that because you cannot have a valid word of mouth transmission from the first century of Islam over a 200-year period to say that actually carries accurate information.
Yes.
It just can't be done.
Yeah, it can be done.
Because anthropologists have looked at different cultures where you have word of mouth transmission and it distorts over time. It just does.
Yeah, so the science of Hadith takes that into account.
The science of Hadith
Takes that into account.
takes that into account. Okay.
So people that don't have good memory, they are not taken as narrators to declare a Hadith as
How do
clear
you
on
know
how
they have a good or bad
Okay.
memory?
you know?
Okay.
So
Here I've got something. I have to photocopy because it's too big. For the camera, the Encyclopedia of Islam. Pretty much the standard of Islamic studies. And it's this is the 1986 edition. And I've got from it about the Hadith, the chapter on Hadith. I just want to read it about these men, that allegedly about whom there's a science, these transmitters. It says, criticism was made of transmitters for various other reasons, because I've given the various Muslims' criticism of the transmitters in previous paragraphs. It says, some were accused of carelessness in transmission, others of being inaccurate in old age, others of pretending to transmit traditions when they'd lost their books and were depending on a faulty memory. Al-Hakim, who died in 1014 of the year of our Lord, accuses some of tracing back to the Prophet traditions which went back only to companions or successors. So this is part of the science of Hadith to explore. But then it goes on, it says, as a result of the effort to to investigate the genuineness of traditions, biographical works were compiled regarding the people who appear in the isnads. Obviously the isnads being the chain of transmissions, as you know. It was important to know the years of their birth and the death, for this shows whether they could have met the people they're said to have quoted. Statements were also recorded regarding the degree of their trustworthiness, but these raised problems, for they were frequently contradictory. Although it's said that such material was collected from the first century of Islam, the books were mainly compiled from the 3rd century onwards. So 200 years later at least, the biographies were compiled. Arabs, it says here, this is again the Encyclopedia of Islam, it says, Arabs were notable as genealogists, and therefore one may not unreasonably assume that while the books began to appear comparatively late, materials for the earliest periods were available. Well, this sentence is really dodgy, but as I say, I'm reading from the Encyclopedia of Islam, which is an apologia in some ways for Islam. If it's saying the Arabs were notable as genealogists, it gives no support for that, none at all. And it says one may not unreasonably assume that while the books appeared late, materials for the earliest periods were available. But they're just assuming that. There's no documentary support to say there were early materials. But anyway, just going over past that apologia for this dodginess of transmission in the isnads, it says books were also written confined to traditionalists. And he goes on. Anyway, that's that bit. The relevant part after that, the criticism of traditions was very detailed, showing how seriously the works were undertaken, and one recognises the genuine efforts made to clear away what was false. But Western scholars have tended to argue that the criticism did not go far enough. Goldziher, in his Mohammedanische Studien and elsewhere, has shown that hadith is not based on such firm ground as the conventional doctrine would lead one to suppose, and he's been followed by many others. One readily notices phrases from the Old and New Testaments put into the mouth of the Prophet as his sayings, the Ads and the Abbasids. So these are showing that this is anachronistic. Many miracles are attributed to the Prophet, although the Quran does not represent him as a miracle worker. There's great detail regarding the tribulations before the end of the world and regarding the Last Judgment. There are also elaborate descriptions of heaven and hell. The Western mind finds it difficult to accept such material as genuinely coming from the Prophet. Professor J. Schacht has argued cogently that isnads grew as time passed, and so legal traditions, which belong to a later period, were eventually traced back to the Prophet. While one does not, and this is again the apologia of the Encyclopedia of Islam, while one does not feel justified in explaining away the whole body of tradition on these lines, it's quite clear that much material coming from a later date has been attributed to the Prophet, and this makes it very difficult to find a satisfactory criterion by which one may recognise what is genuine. So even the Encyclopedia of Islam is saying this is a problem, and there's not historical validity here.
What is a hadith that is authentic? What are the conditions for a hadith to be authentic?
Firstly, in here, the Encyclopedia of Islam is saying we can't know.
No, I'm telling you, what are the conditions that we use to say that the hadith is authentic? Because
It says so-and-so said to so-and-so, who lived and was born at some time, and was living at the time of the person from whom he received it. And this person was reliable and trustworthy, as you get from the biographies that were attributed to them. But all those biographies are written for 300, 200 at least years after those men about whom the biographies were written had died. You can't get valid biographical information 200 years later. So the hadith are in toto worthless as historical documents.
Oh, that's the mistake. In total, it's not accurate. So it's true that there are fabrications of them. Hadith, that it's not even that they have a chain of narration. No, they're complete lies. They're lies. And there's people that use this hadith because they don't know they are lies and they are spread. And you may come a lot of Muslims, and they tell you, oh, there is this hadith that says this. You're like, subhanAllah, this is completely fabrication.
I'm talking about the accepted books of Bukhari now. We know this.
Exactly.
Bukhari had 600,000. He whittled down to 7,000. So I know what you're talking about. This is addressing the alleged hadith, the alleged authentic hadiths. It's saying the Western scholars don't care about the ones Muslims are dismissed. They go. What do we got? Yeah, Motsky, Schurler, Gurkha. These are major hadith scholars in the West, and they argue over what you can know, how far back you can go with the hadith criticism, and how you can produce models to try and assess whether this Islamic tradition is valid. But even they all say that when the fruits of this kind of research yields next to nothing of historical information about Muhammad and his life, and that of his companions. So what we're saying is that no matter what you do in terms of what you regard as the science of hadith, it's all worthless from an historical point of view. When we talk about historical science in the West, true history is not what you guys believe it is.
And this example that I gave you, Abdullah bin Umar to Nafi to Mali.
How do you know they're valid? They've been transmitted.
That's why I'm asking you.
They didn't transmit. The only way you know they transmitted is by a hadith which is produced in writing 200 to 250 years after the event. The names of those transmitters are given not at the time they're transmitted, but 200 to 250 years after the event. And the biographies of these men as authentic transmitters are given 200 years at least after those men lived.
So you're telling
That's the problem. You've got a yawning 2-century gulf at least between these alleged facts and the writing down of them. In our historical, it's like me saying, oh, the Battle of Waterloo took place in 1815, and the Duke of Wellington led the British Army, the English Army, and Blucher led the Germans against Napoleon, who led the French, and he was the Emperor of France, and nothing at all was written about the Battle of Waterloo between 1815 and 2022. And I'm now telling you, I've just written it down here, do you believe me? You say, get lost. It's 200 years between the event, and you tell me we have nothing in between.
That's the thing. Now I'm telling you then, who's making it up?
And if I say, oh, don't worry, I know that the Duke of Wellington passed it to the Duke of York, who said it to Prince Albert, who said it to Queen Victoria, and I'm saying this now. I've written it down now, 2 centuries later.
Okay, what about?
How can it have any validity? The information you give me is not valid.
Why is that important, the writing?
What?
Why is that important, the writing? Abdullah bin Umar did not write it for nothing. I did not write it for Imam Malik. They told each other.
You say they told each other, but the statement that they told each other is only written 200 years after they allegedly told each other.
Why does it matter that it's written? First of all, some hadith were written before that. Like
what difference the written earliest written
Abdullah bin Amr bin al-As. He wrote a hadith, and there is a hadith that says explicitly that the Prophet said, yeah, I wrote.
Right, which collection is it in?
This specific hadith, I think it may be in the Bukhari, but I'm not sure.
In what?
Sahih Bukhari, I think, but I'm not sure.
My point is this, it doesn't matter which of the major collection it's in. Bukhari wrote 200 to 250 years after the event, so that hadith is only written for the first time.
Yeah, but
then
disregard. Okay, it doesn't matter. Why the transmitter tradition is not valid?
Because the transmitter tradition is only written down about 200 years later.
Why is it important that it's written down?
It's important that it's written down because otherwise you should believe me if I talk about the Battle of Waterloo 200 years after it took place without any writings about it. They're contemporary.
Exactly. So now I write something that, oh, that building is mine, and I show the paper written down, and you will believe that.
No, because that building exists now. I could go to that building and see it exists now, or I could go to deeds in the land registry. You say who owns that building. You haven't got any existing edifice for me to look at now.
So having it written down on a memory is no difference.
No,
even if it's written down, you will reject it. So.
No, if it was written, if the Muslims could say, right, 20 years after Muhammad died, we've got written documents about what he said and what he did, other than the Quran. We've got various written documents about his life, his battles, and so on. 20 years after he died, Well, no, we don't, because the information you have is in the Sirah and the Hadith. What have we got today? It's what we've got today that I'm talking about. But what we've had from the Middle Ages, in fact. What's come down to us? Muhammad allegedly lived in the beginning of the 7th century, right? 570 to 632. We have to have documents that are from at least the middle of the 7th century or the later 7th century. We don't have them. We have Bukhari's writings and the Sirah, which are much later. They're too far distant from the events they describe to be valid. Well, no Western historian looks at historical events based upon documents written centuries after the events they were described.
Isn't that for all religions? Peter and Paul.
No, not ours. Not ours. Our documents, our Gospels, our letters of Paul are written within a few decades of the events they purport to describe. So, for example, Matthew's Gospel written within 15 to 20 years of Jesus' death. So I'm focusing on this now, which is worse than many religions. The Jews have this problem as well. Jews have a big problem like this. But we're talking about Islam right now.
I think that the main issue is for other religions is that they have a text, and that's all they have. A paper, and they believe that that's the original. How do you know that paper is the original?
Nobody's got the original. The Muslims don't, we don't. Nobody has the original. What we have is
transmitted orally.
You
don't have that.
Only, how are you seriously saying that the documents we have from the 1st century AD are inferior, which tell us about Jesus, inferior to what you've got from 200 to 250 years later, which is already transmitted over 2.5 centuries?
An imam that has the Quran memorized nowadays and can track it back to the mouth of the Prophet ﷺ, he has it more accurate than what you have looking at the paper.
I already looked at your hadith and said there are great holes in the allegation that you had oral transmission from the beginning. So what you've got is not just the Quran. Islam is not the Quran. Islam is this. It's a hadith. Because don't forget, the Quran could be anything. It doesn't mention Muhammad's name except once or twice in the Quran, correct?
Once. I don't know exactly the name, but
okay, it's just no more than 4 times he mentioned. It doesn't tell you what kind of person Muhammad is. It doesn't tell you. If it says he's a prophet, that doesn't tell us the nature.
The point of the Hadith of Islam, I agree.
And the Quran, it gives us some information about doctrine. That's true, but it doesn't give us Islam all the vast amount of information you need to have Islam. You get that through the Hadith.
Yeah.
So if the Hadith are actually not historically based, then the whole religion is not.
The Hadith are useful to understand the Quran because many things we don't understand. Allah says in the Quran, pray, but
I agree.
How to pray.
But if the Hadith are not historically authentic, then there's a problem. And you say they are because you trust that a man can transmit to another man orally over a quarter of a millennium, and it's still trustworthy. Whereas when anthropologists look at West African oral tradition, it doesn't transmit accurately. There's a complicated way of oral transmission transmitted. That's why the hadith that Bukhari disposed of are disposed of, because transmitting orally means you craft the hadith, you reshape them. That's what Western studying of hadith has shown.
Yeah, and hadith.
Actually, I was going to say.
So that you reject hadith that are.
I reject anything that says you can't.
I reject.
Okay, yeah, but you're saying that you still can transmit. You're still transmitting orally over 2 centuries or more. No culture does that. Why should suddenly Islam? Why should the Arabs be special compared to other primitive societies that they can accurately orally transmit over 2 centuries when West Africans never could?
But actually, I was just going to.
One moment, let's not lose the thread.
Yeah, let me ask you a question.
Well, okay, so this is not answerable. Go on.
But if one of the companions of Jesus, were to transmit something, one of the companions of Jesus would say something to you about Jesus, would you believe him?
You mean if he would say something to me?
Yeah.
But Jesus was living 2,000 years ago.
Imagine you were.
If I was back then. Listen. Yeah, totally. If I'm an eyewitness to something an apostle has said, then that's brilliant. That's first class.
Okay. Now, Jesus did something, say something. The companion saw it. Yeah. You know that this particular companion, has good memory.
Yeah.
He doesn't make mistakes. when he
No.
claims
That's
something.
no way is that you cannot say.
So you cannot.
cannot.
So you will reject it.
We Catholics do
You will
not
reject
rely on the memories of the apostles.
So you
We
reject
say
them.
the Holy God Himself infused them with the power to reproduce accurately what Jesus said. No way does our religion rely on memory.
Yeah.
That's fallible immediately.
Yeah.
Once you start
We
saying you
don't
rely
care.
on memory, you've got a deficient religion.
Well,
Yeah,
then
yeah.
what do you say?
Because you're reliant upon man's ability, which is weak, or at least flawed, and we want
then we all do the
perfect
same. What's
transmission of the faith.
Then we go to the same principle, that is that you believe that Bible has been preserved because God said so, and I believe that Quran and Hadith has been preserved because of that.
No, you don't.
Any-
You believe you firstly rely on Bukhari and his intellectual abilities to give you the traditions
No.
by
that's
which you
with-
know, by which you allegedly know what happened in early Islam, and you rely on the companions to accurately remember. You've just said
No.
we don't. That's actually a
That's
religious
the-
attitude,
Where?
which shows a flawed religion.
That's the argument that I have to use with you, because if I say, yeah, Allah says in the Quran that He preserved Quran and Hadith, you will not believe it.
No,
right?
outside Allah says you can argue that Allah
The
says the
dhikr, the
Quran,
remembrance.
the Quran
remembrance.
will be preserved, but
No,
you
the
can't say.
remembrance.
No way does the Islam say
The
that.
remembrance.
Where did
That's
it
the Quran
say?
and the Hadith.
Where did it say in the Hadith that Allah guarantees the Hadith would be preserved accurately?
No, he says
Because it would
that-
be contradicted by the historical
He says
reality
that- He says that He will preserve the dhikr, the remembrance.
of
And
the
that
Quran.
It's both, because you cannot understand the Quran without the
Now you're interpreting.
No, now you're interpreting as well, innit?
Yes, and so therefore,
So-
if that's reliant on your human interpretation,
It's a
and
human
you're not even
interpretation.
you're not even a prophet of God,
Did the companions of the
Then
Prophet
that's no
understand
good.
it the way I'm saying it?
did the companions understand? No, because we don't know whether there were any companions. We don't know any of this because the Hadith are not historically reliable.
Well, everyone. So
Nobody in the West says we can study history on the basis of chains of transmitters over 2 centuries.
You do it in a
Nobody.
paper,
Give me any
you don't know
study.
who-
Give me any study in the West of any historical area that we use Islamic
Well,
methodology.
You're quite accurate with that in the West.
Well,
That's the-
give me a better intellectual tradition than in the West.
No. Wait, I'm giving you this oral transmission.
You see, you live in
Accurate
this.
is much
You're
better.
living in this
Listen,
religious world.
I believe-
But go outside of that for a minute, and you tell me a better intellectual tradition than the Western intellectual tradition.
And-
Everything that we are saying about how you conduct historical analysis applies to how I look at Catholicism, and it comes up trumps. When we do it with Islam, the Western historical tradition shows that Islam is just like believing in fairies at the bottom of the garden.
Yeah, so the Western Christian says that.
No, the
come on.
Western intellectual
Wait, let me say
tradition
something.
outside
Let
of
me talk
religion.
to some. Yeah,
Just
to clarify
applying
one
Western
thing.
historical
Just to clarify one
traditions.
When I say that I believe that Hadith has been preserved and
Yeah.
the Quran has been preserved, I believe that because that's in the Quran, but I just don't do that out of pure faith. I also have this argument.
Hisham,
to prove
do
it.
you have
Okay.
an ayah in the
No,
Quran
sorry.
with that
Sorry.
Hadith is preserved?
Wait, let me finish, please.
This one
He's
has
right,
Yeah,
the
the
Quran.
dhikr. I just told you.
No,
Not
it's
about, not in the Quran,
No,
about,
I'm Muslim.
about the Hadith.
Yeah, but I just told you. The dhikr. What is it? Just the Quran.
You see, the Quran has been preserved.
yeah,
You
yeah.
say that the Hadith is preserved.
Yeah, wait 1 second, I will do that and we can...
Show me any
I
hadith.
can-
I'm
Yeah,
listening.
yeah,
I'm
Yeah, yeah,
listening.
so what I'm saying is, I believe that victim has been preserved because Allah has preserved it. Right? Now, if I come to you and you're not Muslim, you're not going to believe that Allah has preserved the Quran. Then I have to show you something different from that. Then we have this oral translation which makes complete sense.
Makes complete sense.
Yeah. Now maybe to you not, but what do you have on the other hand? Let
The
me ask you.
it makes no sense to the entire Western world.
Yeah, that's why they are not Muslims.
No, it's not that. Since ancient Greece,
they are Christians.
we followed a particular intellectual approach. You do not, and one of the fruits of that intellectual approach is you cannot rely on an oral tradition that spans centuries. You just can't.
So you rely
Every
on
traditional
writings.
society does.
You rely on writings
Yes.
that you don't know who wrote, and you don't know if they are biased, altered, or anything like that.
Listen,
that's much worse.
No,
That's what I'm
wait a
saying.
minute. We firstly, it's not worse. It's far better. But secondly, it is not to deny what you've said. The possibility of bias, there's possibility of forgery, possibility of not knowing who the author is. All these things that's within the Western intellectual tradition. You examine these things, but you don't get anywhere by relying on a pre-modern, primitive society which uses oral tradition allegedly spanning centuries. It just doesn't work. You have to start with documents. That doesn't mean documents are perfect. And I use the documentary arguments with non-Catholics, but from a Catholic perspective, we have the church, which is inspired by God to guarantee the truth of something. In Islam, even if I were to allow the Hadith approach that you take, it still wouldn't be sufficient, because the Hadith are collected by fallible men. Bukhari, Tirmidhi, Muslim, these were not inspired by Allah, they were not prophets themselves. Therefore, they're collecting. The science of Hadith is a science of men, and it can therefore be wrong.
Okay.
The companions could be wrong because they were not prophets. So that means that in Catholicism, you can't say this, because we say the apostles were inspired by God, the Catholic Church is inspired by God, and therefore, whether you believe it or not, the whole system is a closed, locked, perfect system. But the system of Islam is not. It's full of the intellectual abilities of men, which are all fallible. Outside of Muhammad, I'm not talking about Muhammad, he's the prophet. He can speak perfectly.
Right.
That I'm not doubting is part of your system.
Shall I say,
But when your
tell you
system
some
has
ayat
men
in the Quran?
who form part of the religion, then there's a problem. Okay,
let me ask
sure, I don't mind. I don't mind which of you guys. I don't mind which of you guys. I don't mind.
Let me ask you something. I've been listening for a minute. Let me just.
Great talking to you as well. Hope we talk again, my friend. Nice, really nice.
Israelites will return to take down Islam.